Margaret Hale never imagined her own mother would throw her out of her younger sister's wedding, after she had secretly given up 13 years of her life to make that day possible. The moment she reached the entrance, the wedding coordinator's eyes went wide with panic. "I'm so sorry, Wood," she whispered, glancing at her clipboard. "Your name isn't on the list. It was removed about 2 hours ago." Margaret's stomach dropped. Before she could ask a single question, she heard her mother's voice behind her, calm, almost pleasant, the kind of voice you'd use to comment on the weather. "Why would we invite someone who isn't really family?" Margaret turned slowly. Her mother was smiling as if she hadn't just erased her own daughter from the biggest day of her sister's life. What her mother didn't know, what she had never bothered to find out, was that Margaret's name was on the venue contract, the one that had paid for every chair, every centerpiece, every second of that ceremony. Within minutes, the entire wedding would come to a stop, because of one detail her mother had never seen coming. Margaret had spent 11 years as a trauma nurse, the kind of work where strangers looked at her in their worst moment and trusted her to get them through it. She was good at that. She had never expected the hardest people to save would be her own family. That afternoon, she'd arrived in her best navy dress, carrying a small wrapped gift that had waited 13 years to reach her sister's hands. She gave her name to the woman at the check-in table and watched the color drain out of the woman's face. "I'm sorry," the coordinator said again, quieter this time. "But it was removed this morning." Margaret didn't get the chance to ask why. Her mother was already walking toward her, chin lifted, voice pitched just loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. "Why would we invite someone who isn't really family?" The words landed like a slap. Margaret looked at her for a long moment, then nodded once. "If that's really how you feel," she said quietly, "then this is the last time you'll ever call me family." She turned and walked back to her car, certain she had just lost the only people she'd spent 13 years trying to save. Understand how they got here, you have to go back to the year. Margaret turned 22. Her father died suddenly of a heart attack, and in the chaos of the funeral, Grace was only 14, too young to be told what Margaret found out a week later, alone, going through the mail. The mortgage was 4 months behind. She found her mother sitting on the kitchen floor one night, surrounded by unpaid bills, crying in a way Margaret had never seen. "I don't know what to do," her mother said. "Please, help me save the house." But Grace can never know where the money came from. She's already lost her father. I won't let her lose her childhood too. Margaret agreed. She told herself it was the right thing to do. So she took the overnight shifts nobody wanted, because they paid more. Every payday, she wired nearly half her income into her mother's account, and watched it become the mortgage, the roof repair, Grace's braces, Grace's school trips, and eventually, all 4 years of Grace's college tuition. Every dollar passed through her mother's hands first, which meant everyone believed her mother was the one holding the family together. She became the admired widow at church potlucks and school pickup lines. Margaret became the daughter who never came around anymore. Nobody knew any different because nobody was supposed to. As the years went by, Grace drifted. Margaret missed a birthday here, a holiday there, always, because a shift ran long or a patient coded, and she couldn't leave. Each time her mother had an explanation ready. "Your sister just doesn't prioritize us anymore," she'd tell Grace, and Grace, 14 and then 18 and then 22, had no reason not to believe her. Invitations stopped reaching Margaret's inbox. Phone calls got shorter, then rare. The sister Margaret loved grew up believing she'd been abandoned, while the truth was the opposite. Margaret kept giving more, because she thought silence was the same thing as protection. She was wrong about that. She just didn't know it yet. 2 years ago, the call came. Grace was engaged. "One more favor," her mother said. Grace found the perfect venue, right on the lake, but they can't afford it. Margaret didn't hesitate. She paid the full $26,000 herself. Because the venue required the cardholder to sign every document, her name went on the contract as the official client. Her mother offered to stay listed as the day of contact, so you're not bothered during your shifts. And Margaret, exhausted and trusting, agreed. She had no idea that single signature would end up being the only piece of evidence powerful enough to expose 13 years of lies. As the wedding got closer, Margaret was left out of everything. No dress fitting, no engagement dinner, no rehearsal. Then, 8 weeks before the ceremony, an invitation arrived at her apartment with no return address. Inside, in Grace's handwriting, "Please come. I mailed this one myself." Margaret read it 3 times before she let herself believe it meant something. It was the first sign in years that her sister still wanted her there. That hope lasted exactly until she reached the entrance and heard her mother say she wasn't really family. She drove home with the gift still on the passenger's seat, certain there was nothing left to salvage. But back at the venue, something was already unraveling. The coordinator, unable to reach Margaret's mother about the sudden guest list change, pulled up the contract to confirm the policy. Any major change required written sign-off from the paying client. There was no sign-off. There had been no permission at all. She brought it straight to the groom. Daniel stared at the paperwork, then at his new mother-in-law. "You're telling me," he said slowly, "that Margaret paid for this wedding? All of it?" Before anyone could answer, his father, Walter, leaned over to read the name on the contract and went still. 3 years earlier, after a car accident nearly killed him, a trauma nurse named Margaret Hale had sat beside his bed through the worst nights of his recovery, the one who never once let him give up. "I know that name," Walter said quietly. "She saved my life." In that moment, the story everyone believed about Margaret, that she'd drifted away, that she didn't care, collapsed under the weight of what was actually true. The ceremony stopped. Guests exchanged confused glances as phones began lighting up around the reception hall. Grace, still in her dress, demanded to know what was happening, and for the first time in 13 years, her mother had no version of the story left to control. Piece by piece, she admitted it. The house, the tuition, the venue, all of it, paid for by the daughter she'd just turned away at the door. Grace called her within minutes, voice breaking. Was it true? All of it? Margaret, sitting in her car with her hands still shaking, said the only word she had left. Yes. Grace begged her to come back. When Margaret walked back through those same doors, her sister was waiting with their father's old pocket watch cradled in her hands, the gift Margaret had left behind hours earlier. Grace didn't look at their mother. She looked at Margaret. "Will you walk me down the aisle?" Would. They walked the same path where Margaret had been turned away that morning, and this time nobody stopped them. There was no speech, no confrontation, no moment of triumph over her mother, just the quiet fact of the truth, finally standing where everyone could see it. Would. Margaret understood something that day she hadn't let herself see before. Silence can feel like love for a long time. But if you stay quiet long enough, someone else will end up writing your story for you. Real love doesn't survive by hiding. Sooner or later, the truth finds its way into the light. Once it does, no lie is strong enough to stand in its way.